She never imagined a simple walk by the river would turn into a fight for her life. A woman dives into the freezing water to save a drowning baby leopard, but then something unthinkable happens. The tiny creature doesn't just cry out, it speaks. From that moment, nothing is ordinary anymore. Her heroic rescue sparks a deadly hunt, because others know the truth about this leopard, and they'll do anything to claim it. What kind of secret is powerful enough to make a baby animal worth killing for? And can one woman protect the impossible when the whole world wants it silenced? Before we begin, tell me your city or country in the comments. It turns this space from a screen into a circle of real hearts. The late autumn chill hung heavy over the Bitterroot Valley as Claire Donnelly walked along the river's edge, her worn work boots crunching against fallen leaves. At 32 years old, she had grown used to blending into the background of life in rural Montana, just another set of helping hands at Mason Kitteridge's veterinary clinic, known more for her quiet efficiency than any particular skill. November wind whipped her auburn hair from its practical ponytail as she followed her usual afternoon route. These solitary walks helped clear her mind after long days of holding nervous animals and cleaning exam rooms. The rushing river matched her mood, constant, steady, unremarkable. But today was different. A splash caught her attention, not the gentle lapping of water against rocks, but something more desperate. Claire stopped, scanning the churning surface of the Bitterroot. There, about 20 feet out, something thrashed against the current, a small dark shape fighting for survival. Her heart leaped into her throat. Without conscious thought, Claire kicked off her boots and shed her heavy jacket. The rational part of her mind screamed about the danger. The water temperature had to be near freezing. The current was treacherous this time of year. But she couldn't just watch something drown. Hold on. She called out, though she doubted the struggling creature could hear her over the river's roar. Claire plunged into the water, and the cold hit her like a physical blow. Her breath rushed out in a gasp as the icy current grabbed at her clothes, trying to drag her under. Years of swimming in mountain lakes helped her fight through the shock. Claire forced her arms and legs to move, cutting through the water toward the thrashing form. As she got closer, she could make out spotted fur and small paws. Some kind of wild cat, no bigger than a house cat. The creature's movements were growing weaker. Claire reached out, managing to grab what felt like scruff. The animal didn't resist as she pulled it close to her chest, too exhausted to fight. Now came the hard part. The current had carried them downstream, and Claire's limbs were starting to go numb. The shore seemed impossibly far away. "Come on," she gasped, kicking hard against the water. Her waterlogged clothes tried to pull her down. Her lungs burned from the effort. Just when she thought she couldn't fight anymore, her foot struck something solid, a submerged log or rock. Claire used it to push off, driving herself and her burden toward the bank. Finally, her knees scraped against river rocks. Claire crawled onto the shore, still clutching the animal to her chest. She collapsed onto the pebbly ground, shivering violently as she tried to catch her breath. Only then did she get a good look at what she had rescued. Her eyes widened. Pressed against her was a leopard cub, an actual leopard cub, its spotted coat distinctive even when soaked. Claire blinked hard, wondering if the cold had affected her mind. There couldn't be a leopard in Montana. But there was no mistaking those rosette markings, so different from the solid spots of a bobcat. The cub shivered, its eyes barely open. Claire quickly pulled off her wet outer shirt, leaving her in a damp thermal layer. She wrapped the small creature in the fabric, trying to share what little warmth she had left. "It's okay," she murmured, rubbing the bundle gently. "You're safe now. We just need to get you warm and help." Claire froze. The word had been barely a whisper, more breath, then voice. She looked around, but there was no one else on the riverbank. Just her and the leopard cub she held. "Help," came the whisper again, and this time Claire saw the cub's mouth move. Her hands started trembling, and not just from the cold. Did you just... She couldn't finish the question. It was impossible. She must have hit her head during the rescue. Or maybe this was hypothermia setting in, making her imagine things. The cub's eyes opened fully, revealing intelligence that sent a shiver down Claire's spine that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. Those eyes held awareness and fear. Help! It said for a third time, the word clearer now, please. Claire sat very still, her mind struggling to process what was happening. She had just risked her life to save a drowning animal, only to discover it wasn't just an animal at all. The world as she knew it had shifted on its axis, leaving her with a talking leopard, cub shivering in her arms, and more questions than she could begin to count. But one thing was certain. This creature needed her. Whatever it was, wherever it had come from, it had asked for help. And despite her confusion and fear, Claire knew she couldn't turn away. Claire shook her head vigorously, sending droplets of river water flying from her auburn hair. The cold was making her mind play tricks. That had to be it. She'd heard stories of hypothermia victims having strange hallucinations before they. "Thank you for saving me," came the soft voice again, clear as a bell this time. Claire looked down at the bundle in her arms. The leopard cub's eyes met hers. They were an extraordinary silver blue, filled with an intelligence that made her breath catch. "I'm losing my mind," Claire whispered, her teeth chattering. "Animals don't talk. This isn't possible." "I understand your disbelief," the cub said carefully, each word precise and gentle. "My name is Ashar, and you're right. Ordinary animals don't speak, but I'm not ordinary." Claire sat back on her heels, still holding the wrapped cub, but now at arm's length. Her practical scientific mind warred with what she was witnessing. She had spent years working with animals at the veterinary clinic. She knew what they could and couldn't do. This defied everything she understood about the natural world. "You're shivering badly," Ashar observed. "We both need warmth and shelter. Is your home nearby?" The simple logic of this statement cut through Claire's shock. Whatever was happening, they were both soaked to the bone in near-freezing temperatures. That was a real and immediate danger. "My cabin's about half a mile up the trail," she managed. "But before we go anywhere, you need to tell me what's going on. Why was a talking leopard cub drowning in the Bitterroot River?" Ashar's ears flattened against his head. "I was running away. There are men pursuing me, dangerous men who learned of my existence. They want to capture me, study me. My kind has remained hidden from humans for centuries. But now," he trailed off, trembling. "Your kind?" Claire asked, her mind spinning. "There are more like you?" "There were," Ashar said softly. "I'm the last one now." The profound sadness in his voice struck straight to Claire's heart. Whatever else was true, this was a frightened child, different species or not. Her protective instincts flared. "Listen," she said, getting shakily to her feet. "I don't understand any of this. I'm not sure I believe it's really happening. But right now, we both need to get warm and dry. We can figure out the rest after that." She cradled Ashar more securely against her chest and began walking as quickly as her cold-numbed legs would allow. The trail followed the riverbank before, cutting up through the woods toward her small cabin. Every snapping twig made her jump, suddenly aware they might not be alone in these woods. "These men following you," she said between controlled breaths. "How close are they?" "I lost them 2 days ago," Ashar replied. "But they're skilled trackers. They won't give up easily." Claire's heart pounded harder. What was she getting herself into? She was just a veterinary assistant, living a quiet life in the Montana wilderness. Now she was harboring a talking leopard cub while mysterious men hunted him. It sounded like something from a fever dream, but she couldn't deny the weight of the small body in her arms, or the very real intelligence in those silver blue eyes. Whatever Ashar was, whatever danger surrounded him, she couldn't abandon him. The sight of her cabin through the trees nearly made her cry with relief. It wasn't much, just a one-room structure with a small loft, but it was secure and warm. Claire fumbled with her key, fingers clumsy with cold, and finally got them inside. She set Ashar down carefully on her worn couch and quickly built up the fire in her wood stove. As warmth began to fill the space, she grabbed towels and dry clothes for herself. "We need to get you properly dried off," she told Ashar, reaching for him with a towel. He didn't flinch from her touch, letting her gently dry his spotted fur. Up close, she could see how unusual it was, silvery rather than the tawny color of normal snow leopards, with intricate rosette patterns that seemed to shimmer in the firelight. "I've put you in danger by coming here," Ashar said quietly as she worked. "I'm sorry for that, but I had nowhere else to turn." Claire paused in her ministrations, meeting those impossible eyes again. "I'm already in this," she said firmly, even as part of her wondered at her own certainty. "Whatever's going on, whatever these men want with you, I'm going to help keep you safe." The words surprised her even as she spoke them, but she knew they were true. In the space of an hour, her ordinary life had transformed into something extraordinary and dangerous. But looking at the small, mysterious creature before her, she couldn't make any other choice. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Claire's cabin windows when a sharp knock at the door made her jump. Ashar, who had been dozing by the wood stove, instantly became alert, his silver-spotted fur bristling. "Quick," Claire whispered, gesturing toward the loft. "Hide up there." She waited until Ashar had silently scaled the ladder before approaching. The door. Dr. Mason Kittredge stood on her porch, his tall frame wrapped in an expensive wool coat. His perfectly styled silver hair and warm smile were familiar sights from the clinic, but something felt different about his presence here. "Claire, I heard about your adventure in the river today," Mason said, his voice rich with concern. "I had to check on my favorite assistant. May I come in?" Claire's stomach tightened. How had he heard about the river? She hadn't told anyone. "Of course, Dr. Kittredge," she said, stepping aside. "I'm fine, really. Just a bit cold and shaken up." Mason's keen eyes swept the cabin as he entered, lingering on the wet towels near the wood stove. "Word travels fast in small towns. Mrs. Henderson saw you pull something from the river." She was quite worried. He turned to Claire with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "What exactly did you rescue?" Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. "Oh, just a wounded animal. It got away as soon as we reached shore." The lie felt clumsy on her tongue. "Really?" Mason moved further into the cabin, his boots leaving mud on her clean floor. "That's not what I heard. In fact, I heard it looked rather exotic." From the corner of her eye, Claire caught a slight movement in the loft. She shifted, trying to keep Mason's attention on her. "I was half frozen and exhausted. Whatever I saw, I'm sure I was confused." "Claire." Mason's voice dropped lower, all pretense of warmth vanishing. "I know what you pulled from that river. A silver-spotted leopard cub. Quite valuable, quite rare." He stepped closer, looming over her. "Where is it?" A soft voice echoed in Claire's mind, Ashar's voice, though the cub hadn't moved. "He's the one, Claire. He's the man who killed my family, who's been hunting me." The pieces clicked into place. Mason's frequent conservation trips abroad, the unexplained wealth that paid for his designer clothes and luxury car, the strange sounds she sometimes heard from the clinic's back room late at night. "There's no leopard here," Claire said firmly, lifting her chin. "And if there was, I wouldn't hand it over to someone who trades in endangered animals." Mason's pleasant mask cracked completely. His eyes turned cold and hard as river stones. "Don't be foolish, Claire. This is bigger than you understand. That creature is worth millions to the right buyers. With your salary, I'm sure we can come to an arrangement." "You're right," Claire said. her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. I don't understand. I don't understand how someone who took an oath to help animals could become a wildlife trafficker. How you could kill endangered creatures. For profit, help animals? Mason laughed harshly. I help myself, and that cub is my ticket to early retirement. Now stop playing games. Where is it? Get out. Claire pointed to the door, shocked by her own boldness. Get out of my cabin, Dr. Kitteridge. I don't work for criminals. Mason's hand shot out, gripping her arm painfully. Listen carefully. You're going to tell me where that cub is, or your life is going to become very difficult. I have friends in this town, influential friends. One word from me and you'll never work with animals again. Let go of her. Ashar's clear voice rang out from the loft. Mason's eyes lit up with a frightening gleam as he spotted the leopard. Cub, extraordinary, he breathed. You can speak. I knew there was something special about your bloodline. He released Claire's arm and took a step toward the loft. Do you know how many collectors would pay to own a talking leopard? He's not a possession, Claire said, stepping between Mason and the ladder. He's an intelligent being, and I won't let you sell him like some exotic pet. Mason's face twisted with rage. You don't have a choice. I've spent years tracking this specimen. I won't let some soft-hearted vet assistant ruin everything. He reached into his coat pocket. I didn't want to do this the hard way, but you leave me no choice. Claire saw the glint of metal and realized with horror that he was reaching for a weapon. Before he could withdraw it, Ashar leaped from the loft with surprising grace, landing between them. Though small, his presence radiated an ancient power that made even Mason step back. You've destroyed enough, Ashar said, his young voice carrying centuries of wisdom and grief. You will not harm anyone else I care about. Mason's hand trembled slightly, but his cruel smile remained. We'll see about that. Claire, you've just made a very dangerous enemy. I'll be back with help. And next time, I won't be so polite. He backed toward the door, his eyes never leaving Ashar. Enjoy your new pet while you can. This isn't over. The door slammed behind him, and Claire sagged against the wall, her legs weak with fear and adrenaline. Through the window, she watched Mason's expensive SUV tear down her dirt driveway, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. Are you all right? Ashar asked, pressing against her leg in concern. Claire slid down to sit on the floor, gathering the leopard cub close. No, she admitted, I'm terrified. But I'm also sure I did the right thing. She looked down at Ashar's wise eyes. We'll figure this out, together. Claire paced in her small, cluttered living room, wrestling with conflicting instincts. The shadows from the late afternoon sun painted long shapes across the floor, stark reminders of the gathering threats outside. We need to contact the authorities, Ashar, Claire said, her voice shaking slightly. They can help us. They could arrest Mason. The leopard cub, curled on an ottoman like a patch of moonlight, lifted his head. Mason has powerful allies, Claire. If we go to the police, they might be on his payroll. It could make things worse. Her heart clenched at the thought. Montana wasn't a place for corruption, at least not in her experience. But then, she'd never been tangled in something as deep and dangerous as this before. The unease that had settled into her bones since the confrontation with Mason wouldn't dissipate easily. So we have to get you somewhere safe tonight, somewhere he can't follow. Twilight crept across the sky as Claire packed quickly, her hands shaky yet efficient. They had to leave in darkness, under the cover nature reluctantly provided. Gravel crunched under the truck's tires as Claire and Ashar drove into the night. The road twisted through the mountains like a coiled serpent. She kept her eyes forward, but couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes tracking their progress. As they rounded a bend, headlights flared in the rearview mirror, multiplying with a menacing brightness. The engine of a vehicle roared behind them, driven with reckless speed. Her heart raced in time with the beats of the old engine beneath the Hood, hold on, Ashar. Metal met metal as the pursuing vehicle crashed into the truck's rear, momentum sending them skidding towards the edge. Panic clawed at her throat, a scream strangled in terror. Her tires screamed against the road, the edge of the mountain. Looming closer, the crunch of metal on rock burst through the air as the truck toppled over, sky and ground blurring together in a dizzying dance. The world spun, flipping end over end until a painful halt stopped everything. Claire's head throbbed, blood tracing warm paths down her temples. She forced herself to move, to reach for Ashar. The cub was curled tight in the footwell, shaken but alive. She exhaled shakily, cradling him against her chest. Ashar's gaze met hers, steady despite the fear echoing in both their hearts. Running isn't an option, Claire realized, words firm despite her pain. It's time to fight back. The danger had followed them into the night. Now, in the silence after the chaos, defiance echoed louder than fear. Moonlight filtered through the cracked windshield of Claire's overturned truck, casting eerie shadows across the wreckage. Her whole body ached as she pulled herself from the vehicle, cradling Ashar close. They needed shelter, and fast. The old hunting cabin belonged to her uncle, rarely used but maintained just enough to provide emergency refuge. Claire's hands trembled as she cleaned the cut on her forehead with supplies from the basic first aid kit she'd found inside. Ashar watched her with those unnaturally bright eyes, concern evident in his gaze. "You're hurt," he said softly, patting closer on silent paws. "I'll be okay." Claire winced as she applied antiseptic. "But Ashar, I need to understand. Why does Mason want you so badly? What makes you so special beyond being able to speak?" The leopard cub settled beside her, his silver-spotted fur gleaming in the dim light of the battery-powered lantern. "My kind has existed in secret for centuries, Claire. We carry the memories of all who came before us, knowledge passed down through generations. Not just facts, but wisdom. The secrets of the natural world, the understanding of ancient healing. Practices, the patterns of life itself." Claire's hands stilled. "You mean you remember everything your ancestors knew?" "Yes." Ashar's voice carried a weight beyond his young appearance. "Mason discovered our existence through an old manuscript. He doesn't want just me. He wants access to everything my lineage knows. Knowledge that could be twisted for profit, exploited without care for consequence." The responsibility of what she'd stumbled into settled heavily on Claire's shoulders. This wasn't just about saving one extraordinary cub anymore. It was about protecting centuries of wisdom from corruption. "We can't do this alone," Claire said, determination strengthening her voice despite her exhaustion. "I know 2 people who might help us." The next morning, Claire stood at the door of the ranger station, heart pounding. Jonah Keene looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his weathered features. "Claire, I heard about the accident on the mountain road. Are you all right? I need your help, Jonah." She closed the door behind her, speaking low and fast. "And I need you to believe something impossible." Jonah listened without interruption as Claire explained, his expression growing increasingly grave. When she finished, he stood and paced to the window, running a hand through his hair. "Mason Kitteridge," he muttered. "I never trusted that smooth talk of his. Always seemed too perfect, too polished." He turned back to Claire. "Where's the cub?" "Now. Safe, but I won't say more unless you're with us." Jonah's eyes met hers, steady and searching. "I've known you for years, Claire. You're the most level-headed person I know. If you're telling me this story, I believe you." He grabbed his jacket, and I'm in. Their next stop was trickier. Delilah Strauss lived on the outskirts of town, her property surrounded by no trespassing signs. The former animal trainer had become something of a recluse since leaving Mason's employ 3 years ago. "You're either brave or foolish coming." "Here," Delilah said when she opened the door, her gray hair pulled back in a severe braid. Her sharp eyes took in Claire's bruised face. "Mason's handiwork? You know what he's capable of," Claire replied. "That's why we need your help." Inside Delilah's cluttered living room, surrounded by books on animal behavior and framed photographs of various creatures, they shared Ashar's story. Delilah's hands clenched into fists as they spoke. "I left because I saw him testing drugs on rescued animals," she said, voice tight with old anger. "Claimed it was for research, but it was all about money. Always about money with Mason." She looked at Claire. "You're going up against a dangerous man with deep pockets." "We know," Claire said, "but we have to try." Delilah was quiet for a long moment. "When I left, I promised myself I'd never get involved in anything connected to Mason again." She stood, walking to a shelf filled with notebooks. "But I kept records, names, dates, connections. Everything I saw while working for him." She turned back to Claire and Jonah. "Maybe it's time these came to light." Looking at her unlikely allies, the steady ranger and the world-weary trainer, Claire felt hope rise for the first time since the crash. They were no longer alone in their fight against Mason's greed and corruption. The weight of Ashar's ancient knowledge and the responsibility of protecting it still pressed heavily on her shoulders, but now she had helped to bear it. Their resistance might be fragile, but it was a stark dot in Delilah's cramped kitchen. Maps spread across the worn wooden table. Claire traced her finger along a winding route through Yellowstone's backcountry, while Jonah marked potential hazards in red pen. "There's an old ranger cabin here," Jonah said, circling a spot deep in the park's wilderness. "It's off any official maps, abandoned years ago. Perfect place to hide while we gather evidence against Mason." Delilah leaned forward, her reading, glasses perched on her nose. "The trick isn't the destination, it's getting there. Mason's got eyes everywhere. Private security, corrupt park employees, even some local law enforcement in his pocket." Ashar sat alert on Claire's lap, his silver spotted fur catching the morning light. "We must move soon. Mason grows more desperate by the day." They planned to split into two groups. Claire and Ashar would take the most direct route through the park's eastern sector, while Jonah and Delilah would create a diversion to the west, making it appear they were heading toward Idaho. As dawn broke the next morning, Claire checked her pack one final time. Medical supplies, emergency rations, satellite phone. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from years of preparing clinic supplies taking over. "Ready?" she asked Ashar, who was tucked into a special harness they'd modified to look like ordinary camping gear. "Yes," the cub replied softly, "but Claire, be careful. Mason's men will show no mercy." They'd barely made it 5 miles into the park when Claire spotted the first sign of trouble: boot prints in the mud, fresh and deliberate, moving parallel to their trail. She quickened her pace, veering off the planned route into denser forest. The radio at her hip crackled. "Claire," Jonah's voice was urgent. "They're not buying the diversion. 3 vehicles heading your way from the north. Get off the trail now." Claire's heart hammered, but her hands remained steady as she helped Ashar out of the harness. "Can you move through the trees?" "Yes, but..." The crack of a branch interrupted them. 3 men emerged from the tree line, wearing tactical gear and carrying tranquilizer guns. Claire recognized one as Mason's head of security. "Hand over the cat, Claire," he called out. "Nobody needs to get hurt here." Claire's mind raced, cataloging options like she would symptoms in a sick animal. The stream to their left, too fast. The ridge behind them, too exposed. The dense thicket ahead, possible cover. "When I move, run for the thicket," she whispered to Ashar. "Don't stop, no matter what you hear." One of the men took a step forward. In that instant, Claire grabbed her pack and hurled it at his face. He stumbled, tranquilizer gun discharging harmlessly into the air. Claire seized the moment, driving her shoulder into his midsection, a move she'd used countless times to subdue thrashing livestock. Ashar darted for the thicket as the other men raised their weapons. Claire rolled, snatching up a fallen branch. Years of handling frightened, powerful animals had given her an instinct for movement and balance. She swung the branch in a wide arc, catching the second man's legs and sending him sprawling. A dart whizzed past her ear. The third man was taking aim again when Jonah burst from the trees behind him, tackling him to the ground. They grappled in the dirt until Jonah landed a solid punch, leaving the man motionless. But the first man had recovered, lunging for Claire with a snarl. She sidestepped, using his momentum against him, just as she did with panicked horses. He stumbled past her, and she brought her knee up, years of lifting heavy animals giving the blow extra force. He crumpled, gasping, "Claire!" Jonah shouted, pointing to where the second man was raising his gun. Without hesitation, Claire snatched the fallen tranquilizer dart from the ground and threw it like a veterinary syringe. It struck his hand, making him yelp and drop the weapon. The weapon. The whole confrontation had lasted less than 2 minutes. Claire stood among the groaning men, her breath coming in sharp bursts, but her mind clear and focused. "Jonah," she called out, already moving toward the thicket. "You okay?" "Thanks too." "You," he said, rubbing his jaw where he'd taken a hit. "Where'd you learn to fight like that?" Claire helped him up, a grim smile on her face. "Try giving shots to angry bulls for 10 years. Makes handling humans pretty straightforward." They found Ashar waiting in the thicket, his bright eyes wide with concern. "Claire, are you—" "I'm fine," she assured him, checking him over with practiced hands, "but we need to move. Those 3 won't be Mason's only men in the area." As they hurried deeper into the wilderness, Claire felt something shift inside her. The skills she'd always seen as ordinary, her strength from farm work, her quick thinking from emergency vet cases, her steady hands from countless procedures, had transformed into something powerful. Something that could protect those who needed her. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting back. And Claire finally understood that she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life, even if she hadn't known it. Claire, Jonah, and Ashar rested in a small cave as evening approached. The narrow entrance was barely visible behind thick undergrowth, offering them temporary sanctuary after their violent encounter. Claire tended to Jonah's bruised jaw with supplies from their remaining medical kit, her movements gentle but efficient. "Hold still," she murmured, applying an ice pack. "This will help with the swelling." Ashar sat quietly in the corner, his silver-spotted fur almost glowing in the dim light. He hadn't spoken since they'd found shelter, his bright eyes distant and troubled. Claire noticed his unusual silence. "Ashar," she asked softly, "are you hurt? I should check you over again." The small leopard cub shook his head. "I'm not injured, Claire." His voice trembled slightly. "But there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have shared sooner." Jonah lowered the ice pack, exchanging concerned glances with Claire. The atmosphere in the cave grew heavy with anticipation. "What is it?" Claire asked, moving closer to Ashar. The cub's tail curled tightly around his body, a gesture Claire had learned meant he was distressed. "Mason, he didn't just try to capture me." Ashar's voice cracked. "He already has my parents. He sold them. Months ago." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Sold them? To whom?" "Private collectors. People who would pay anything to own something as rare as us." Ashar's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I heard the men talking before I escaped. My father was sent to somewhere in Dubai, my mother to a private island in the Pacific." He looked down at his paws. "I am the last one left. The last of my kind who remains free." The revelation hit Claire like a physical blow. She had known they were protecting something precious, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. She reached out instinctively, gathering the small cub into her arms. Ashar didn't resist, pressing his face into her shoulder. My parents weren't just my family, he continued, his words muffled against her jacket. They were the keepers of our history, our knowledge. Generations of wisdom passed down through memory. And now, he pulled back to look at Claire, his eyes filled with both grief and determination. Now I'm all that's left. If Mason catches me, everything my kind has learned and preserved over centuries will be lost forever. Jonah leaned forward, his face grave. Why didn't you tell us this before? I was afraid, Ashar admitted. Afraid that knowing the true weight of this responsibility would be too much. That you might decide it was safer to walk away. Claire felt tears stinging her own eyes, but her voice was steady when she spoke. We would never abandon you, Ashar. Never. But he's right, Jonah said quietly. This changes everything. We're not just protecting one life anymore. We're fighting for the survival of an entire species, for the preservation of knowledge we can barely comprehend. Claire stood up, pacing. The small cave as the full implications sank in. Every step they took, every decision they made, now carried the weight of centuries. One mistake could mean the end of not just Ashar, but everything his kind represented. Mason knows this, doesn't he? She asked, turning back to Ashar. That's why he's pushing so hard to capture you, Ashar nodded. The knowledge we carry, some people would pay anything to possess it. And Mason, his voice hardened. Mason only sees profit. He doesn't care about preservation or understanding. He just wants to sell me to the highest bidder. Claire knelt before Ashar, taking his small face between her hands. In his eyes, she saw not just the innocent cub she'd pulled from the river, but the last guardian of an ancient legacy. The responsibility was enormous, almost overwhelming, but instead of fear, she felt her resolve crystallizing into something unbreakable. Listen to me, she said firmly. Mason will not get his hands on you. We will find a way to keep you safe, to protect everything you carry. She looked up at Jonah, seeing the same determination reflected in his face. And maybe, somehow we'll find a way to locate your parents too. Ashar pressed his head against her hand, a gesture of trust that made Claire's heart ache. Thank you, he whispered, for not running away. Running away was never an option, Claire replied, her voice thick with emotion. Not from the moment I heard you speak by the river, and certainly not now. The gravity of their situation settled around them like a heavy cloak. What had begun as a rescue had transformed into something far more crucial, a desperate fight to preserve not just a life, but an entire legacy that might never be recovered if lost. The storm rolled in without warning, turning the Yellowstone wilderness into a maze of howling wind and stinging rain. Claire pulled her jacket tighter, trying to shield Ashar from the worst of the weather as they trudged through the increasingly treacherous terrain. The small leopard cub pressed close against her chest, his fur damp despite her best efforts. We need to find shelter, Jonah shouted over the wind, his usual composed demeanor strained by exhaustion. They had been moving for hours, pushing deeper into the park's backcountry, hoping to lose Mason's men in the wilderness. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the rocky landscape in harsh white flashes. In those brief moments of clarity, Claire caught glimpses of dark figures moving through the trees behind them. Her heart pounded harder. They're still following us, she called out, her voice nearly lost in the storm. Delilah, who had been bringing up the rear, cursed under her breath. Mason must have night vision equipment. We're at a disadvantage in this weather. The group pressed on, their progress slowing as the ground beneath their feet turned to mud. Claire's muscles screamed in protest with each step. They hadn't slept properly in days, surviving on brief rest breaks and whatever food they could carry. Another flash of lightning revealed a steep cliff face ahead. Jonah gestured toward it, urgently. There might be some cover up there. We can't keep moving in the open. They began to climb, the wet rocks treacherous under their hands and feet. Claire's fingers were numb with cold, making it difficult to maintain her grip while keeping Ashar secure. The cub had been unusually quiet, sensing the gravity of their situation. Halfway up the incline, a spotlight beam cut through the darkness, pinning them in its harsh glare. "Claire!" Mason's voice boomed through a megaphone, somehow carrying over the storm. "This has gone far enough. You're putting everyone at risk out here." She pressed herself against the rock face, trying to shield Ashar from view. Below, she could make out several vehicles with their headlights blazing, illuminating Mason's men as they began to spread out around the base of the cliff. "He's right about one thing," Delilah whispered, her face drawn with fatigue. "We can't keep this up much longer." Claire knew she was right. They were exhausted, cold, and running out of options. But the weight of Ashar against her chest reminded her of everything at stake. "We have to," she said firmly. "We're all that stands between Mason and the last of Ashar's kind." A rock dislodged above them, clattering down the cliff face. Claire looked up to see more of Mason's men rappelling down from the top of the cliff. They were being surrounded. "This way," Jonah hissed, pointing to a narrow ledge that curved around the rock face. It was their only option. They inched along the precarious path, pressed flat against the whetstone. The wind seemed determined to tear them from their perch, gusting with renewed fury. Claire's arms ached from holding Ashar, but she refused to loosen her grip. The ledge led to a shallow cave, barely more than an indentation in the rock. They huddled inside, watching as flashlight beams swept closer. "Claire," Ashar spoke for the first time since the storm began, his voice trembling. "I'm scared." She pulled him closer, trying to share what little warmth she had left. "I know, but I won't let them take you, I promise." A figure appeared at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the storm. Mason stepped into view, rain dripping from his expensive outdoor gear. He looked completely unfazed by the weather, his eyes fixed on Ashar. "Enough of this foolishness," he said, his tone almost conversational. "You're all exhausted. Someone's going to get hurt. Just hand him over, and we can all go home." Claire felt Jonah and Delilah tensing beside her, ready for a fight despite their exhaustion. She rose slowly to her feet, keeping Ashar close. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "We are exhausted. But if you think that means we'll give up, you don't understand what we're fighting for." Mason's pleasant expression hardened. "I understand perfectly. I understand that you're throwing away everything, your career, your safety, possibly your life, for an animal." "He's not just an animal," Claire shot back. "He's the last guardian of something precious, something you want to sell to the highest." "Bitter. And you think you can protect him?" Mason laughed, the sound sharp and cold. "Look at yourself, Claire. You can barely stand." As if to emphasize his point, Claire's legs trembled with fatigue. Behind Mason, she could see more of his men taking up positions around the cave entrance. They were trapped, with a sheer drop on one side and armed men on the other. "Maybe I can't stand much longer," Claire admitted, even as she straightened her spine. "But I'll never stop fighting you." "None of us will." Mason's face darkened. He raised his hand, and his men raised their weapons. "I've tried to be reasonable. I've given you every chance to end this sensibly." He took a step forward. "Now you've forced my hand." The tension in Claire's muscles shifted from exhaustion to determination. She glanced at Jonah and Delilah, seeing her own resolve mirrored in their faces. In that moment of shared understanding, a plan formed in her mind. "You want Ashar?" Claire's voice carried over the howling wind. "Then come and get him." She burst forward, catching Mason off guard as she shouldered past him into the storm. The sudden movement scattered his men, who hadn't expected such bold action from their cornered prey. After her. Mason's enraged shout followed Claire as she plunged into the darkness. The storm became her ally, the driving rain reducing visibility to mere feet. Claire knew these trails from years of hiking, while Mason's men were outsiders. She could hear them stumbling in the darkness behind her, their flashlight beams cutting uselessly through the sheets of rain. Jonah and Delilah split off in different directions, drawing away several of Mason's men. The confusion of multiple targets in the storm worked exactly as Claire had hoped. "Hold tight, Ashar," she whispered, feeling the cub's claws grip her jacket more firmly. She scrambled up a steep incline, using roots and rocks as handholds. Rain made everything treacherous, but desperation lent her strength. Behind her, she could hear Mason's voice growing closer. He knew her trick, focusing on her trail while his men chased the others. Claire reached a narrow ridge, the drop-off. On either side, lost in darkness. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sheer cliffs and the raging river far below. She pressed forward, knowing she was running out of options. "Claire!" Mason's voice was closer now. "There's nowhere left to run." She spun around to face him. He stood 20 feet away, his expensive rain gear gleaming in another flash of lightning. Two of his men flanked him, their weapons raised. "It's over," Mason said, stepping forward. "You've lost everything already. Don't make me take your life too." Claire backed away slowly, feeling the edge of the cliff behind her. "You still don't understand," she said. "Some things are worth losing everything for." Mason lunged forward with surprising speed. His hand caught Claire's jacket, and in the struggle, Ashar slipped from her grip. The cub tumbled onto the wet rock between them. "No!" Claire screamed. But Mason was faster. He snatched Ashar up by the scruff of his neck, holding him like a trophy. "Finally," Mason breathed, his face transformed by triumph. "Do you know what he's worth? What secrets his kind holds?" "I know exactly what he's worth," Claire said. She gathered every ounce of strength left in her body. "That's why I'll never let you have him." She launched herself at Mason, catching him completely off guard. The impact sent them both staggering toward the cliff edge. Mason's grip on Ashar loosened, and the cub scrambled free. They grappled in the rain, teetering on the brink. Mason's face contorted with rage as he realized his prize was slipping away. He reached for Ashar again, overextending himself. "No!" Claire grabbed his jacket, using his own momentum against him. Mason's eyes widened as he lost his balance. His hands clawed at empty air as he toppled backward over the edge. Claire felt herself being pulled with him. Her body slammed against the cliff face as Mason's weight dragged her down. She clung to a jutting rock with one hand, her shoulders screaming in protest as Mason dangled from her other arm. "Pull me up," he shouted, his composed facade finally cracking. "Pull me up, damn you." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the fear in Mason's eyes. In that moment, Claire saw the truth. His greed, his obsession, all of it had led to this inevitable end. "Let go," she said quietly. Mason's grip on her jacket slipped. He clawed desperately at the fabric, but the rain had made everything treacherous. With a final terrified cry, he fell away into the darkness. Claire hung there, her strength failing. Above her, she could hear Ashar calling her name, his voice full of fear. Jonah and Delilah's shouts joined his, growing closer. She tried to pull herself up, but her arms wouldn't respond. The rock she clung to was slick with rain, and her fingers were growing numb. Just as her grip began to fail, strong hands grabbed her arms. Jonah and Delilah pulled Claire to safety, their faces etched with concern. She collapsed onto the wet ground, her entire body shaking from exhaustion and cold. Ashar pressed against her side, his warmth a small comfort in the storm. "We need to move," Delilah said, helping Claire to her feet. "Mason's men won't stay scattered for long." The journey to the sanctuary took them deep into Yellowstone's most remote territory. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached the hidden valley, its entrance concealed by ancient rock formations and dense forest. Claire had heard whispers of this place, a refuge for creatures that needed protection from the world of men. An elderly Native American woman named Sarah met them at the entrance, her weathered face showing no surprise at their unusual group. She had been expecting them, somehow knowing they would come. "Welcome, little one," she said to Ashar, kneeling before him. "Your ancestors spoke of this place. Here, you will be safe." Claire watched as Ashar took in his new home. The valley stretched before them, a paradise hidden from the world. Other rare creatures moved in the morning mist, animals Claire had thought extinct or mythical. This was where they had survived, protected by people who understood the value of keeping such wonders safe from exploitation. "You did it," Jonah said softly, standing beside her. "You actually did it." Claire felt tears well up in her eyes. "We did it," she corrected him. "I couldn't have managed alone." Ashar patted back to her, his bright eyes meeting hers. "Claire," he said, his voice carrying wisdom beyond his years, "you were never alone. You just needed to discover your own strength." She knelt down, running her hands through his silver-spotted. "For one last time, I'm going to miss you." "And I you," Ashar replied. "But your path lies out there, where others need your courage. Mine is here, protecting the knowledge of my kind." Delilah touched Claire's shoulder. "He's right. You're not the same person who pulled a drowning cub from the river. You've changed." Claire stood, feeling the truth of those words in her bones. The quiet veterinary assistant who had always stayed in the background was gone. In her place stood someone who had faced impossible odds and emerged stronger. "What will you do now?" Jonah asked, his hand finding hers. Claire looked at him, seeing the warmth and belief in his eyes. He had never doubted her, even when she doubted herself. "I think it's time I started my own veterinary practice," she said. "There are too many people like Mason in this world. Animals need someone who'll protect them, not exploit them." "You won't have to do it alone," Jonah said. Squeezing her hand, Sarah approached them, her ancient eyes twinkling. "The sanctuary will always be open to you, Claire Donnelly. You've proven yourself a true guardian." Claire took one last look at Ashar, who sat proudly beside Sarah. The frightened cub she had pulled from the river was gone too, replaced by a creature who carried the hope of his entire species. Their eyes met in silent understanding. Both of them had found their true strength. As they prepared to leave, Ashar spoke one final time. "Thank you, Claire, for believing in the impossible." "Thank you," she replied, "for helping me believe in myself." The morning sun broke through the clouds as they left the valley, its entrance disappearing behind them like a dream. But Claire knew it was real. Just as she knew that her life would never be the same. The long trek back to civilization was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. But there was peace in that silence, the peace of knowing they had done something truly meaningful. Justice had been served, not through violence but through the triumph of courage over greed. Jonah's steady presence beside her felt right, like the beginning of something new and hopeful. Claire realized that while one chapter of her story had ended, another was just beginning. She was ready for it, whatever challenges lay ahead. She was no longer the person who others overlooked. She had become someone who stood up for what was right, who fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The transformation wasn't just in how others saw her, it was in how she saw herself. If this story warmed you tonight, subscribe and leave a single line that stayed with you. Your words shape tomorrow's story.